Watching KTN Prime. Now, for every news headline written about a woman, there are 6 written about men. A report by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation shows that women's voices in news coverage are being overpowered by men. Najma Ismael spoke to Natalie Africa, a senior advisor to the Africa director for the Gates Foundation, and sought to know why women are underrepresented in the media.
It looked at 6 countries across the world: Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, India, the United Kingdom and the United States, found that less than 1% of news stories cover gender equality issues. In 2019, women featured in the news had very few protagonists or expert sources. This was between 14% and 30% in the 6 countries.
The report really seek to answer 4 questions. One was to look at what gender diversity in the workplace and leadership is. And the second was to look at women as a source of news expertise. The third question was to look at how women feature as protagonists in news stories. And the fifth question was to see how gender equality issues are actually covered by news stories.
Patriarchal norms are one of the main reasons why there are barriers for women in the news. These norms prevent the impact of gender equality legislation in news organizations. They enable the continuing dominance of the male perspectives in news making and limit women's presence in news stories as news protagonists and experts.
The author uses a phrase where she says there is a normalized gender blindness in society, both in the North and the South. And by that gender blindness, what she's talking about is the way we actually perceive women when it comes to news stories, when it comes to their voices. And that gender blindness is experienced by women as well as men. Because what the report did is it actually asked people in the public whether they feel that the media needs to be more gender inclusive. And most people said no. And it's only when they gave them the figures and said things like, do you realize that men are quoted 5 times more than women, for example, in politics up to 30 times more than women, then people said, oh, yes, there's a problem. But in everyday life, it appears that most people didn't realize that the news content is actually very skewed against women.
Women's expert voices remain significantly muted in high-profile news genres, such as politics, where men's share of voices is between 3 and 7 times higher than that of women, and the economy, where men's share of voices is between 2 and 31 times higher than that of women.
And the report mentions that in Kenya, for example, even though there are many women in newsrooms, women journalists often end up leaving because they get tired of being put to cover stories that are lower profile or that are stereotyping women.
South Africa are the global leaders in gender parity in the newsroom, where 49% of journalists are women, followed by the United Kingdom at 47% and the United States at between 42 to 45%. Kenya has shown some improvement in gender diversity from 42% in 2015 versus 35% in 2009, while India and Nigeria stand at 28% and 24% respectively.
The progress is mixed based on the findings of the report. There seems to be an interesting juxtaposition where in some countries there has been an improvement in terms of the numbers of women in the newsroom and in leadership positions. Interestingly, South Africa leads as the country with women, the most women represented in leadership positions in the newsroom. Kenya also scores quite high with 35% of women in management. However, what the report is saying that there hasn't been that much difference in the 21st century. A lot of those differences were made earlier on, and in the 21st century, things have kind of stagnated. I think the main takeaway is that even though there has been more women in newsrooms and in positions of leadership, the content of the news and hearing women's voices is where we have a huge challenge.
Overall, even though women make up half the population, they comprise 39% of journalists, while only 26% of female journalists are in leadership positions. Gender parity remains constantly out of reach. 91% of men and 86% of women have been found to hold at least one bias against women. Najma Ismael, KTN News.